without any further ado, we can start the show. Shortbox Nation, without further ado, I said that twice, huh? Let's talk comics and process of a certified pro. Let's welcome Jeff Parker to the show. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the Shortbox. How you doing?
Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Yeah, Jeff, I am so glad we were able to make this happen. We tried a few times earlier this week, but life
I kept
happens.
screwing it up. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, right? It gave me even more time to kind of calm down my anxiety of not being as prepared as I like to be, which is always like a very high bar if I'm being real. It gave me time to finish this very long, detailed, but amazing interview that you did with Tom Spurgeon, with the
Good.
comics reporter.
Oh man, wasn't that guy great?
He was amazing. Like his line of questions has always been awesome, but there was something about kind of honing in on his train of thought, how he kind of moderated the discussion with you. I mean, he's an icon in terms of.
He was easily one of the most thoughtful journalist interviewers the medium ever had, and
Agreed.
it's such a loss to have him gone.
Yeah, if anything, it makes me want to go through some of these archived interviews on the Comic Reporter website.
Oh yeah, there's some great stuff in there. You'll love it.
Yeah, I can't wait. So I had time to catch up on that, and then I got to do something the other day. And then I also got time to finish one of my favorite runs by you, Agents of Atlas.
Oh, good.
And speaking of Agents of Atlas, I had a chance to stop into a local bookstore the other day. And I was like, I wonder what I could find by Jeff Parker here. And I actually have them here with me. I was super excited to grab these because I don't own these in print edition. And one of these I have just recently read. So I'll hold this up to the camera. But I picked up this Agents of Atlas versus Avengers and X-Men, which collects the two miniseries, Agents of Atlas versus X-Men and Avengers versus Atlas. And then a new one that I was reading on the Marvel Unlimited app for the first time. And I found it kind of serendipitous that I found a nice hardcover collection. But Agents of Atlas, Volume 1, that collects your 2000 and I think this is your 2006 run.
Yeah, that was the whole intro. That's where it all starts.
Yeah. So I've never read this one. I read the second series that was in 2009. And I think between that and then X-Men versus Agents of Atlas, that was my first conscious exposure to your work. And I've been, I love those series. Those series are awesome. So being able to read the series at launch, Agents of Atlas, for the first time, I was like, oh, damn, he's always had like the magic, even for like the first series. I guess, just kind of diving right into the interview. Can you tell me how this holds up for you personally, the Agents of Atlas stuff, when you look back at the series, considering that it was one of your, I don't know if it was your longest run at Marvel, but I mean, it was a substantial chunk of your time at Marvel. And I mean, do any memories or lessons stand out to you? And I guess speaking of Tom Spurgeon, I want to say that he called it one of the best titles of the post-bankruptcy era of Marvel, which I was like, agreed.
I'll take that. That was a great way to put it. No, I loved working on that series. And I think from the outside, what I could tell from like fans writing about it, like I think a lot of people assumed I just went in constantly pitching Agents of Atlas to everybody. And that's not what I did at all. I mean, Mark Panicia approached me after he had read the What If issue that's kind of, it all sort of spins out of, and we did our own version of. And just thought, I don't know, I thought there was something here. And then I read it and I went, oh yeah. And I got all excited. Like, it's like, why does Namora just swim up and then she's out of the story? She's like the Wonder Woman here. She ought to be in the whole thing. And Jimmy Woo shouldn't be at a desk. He should be out in the field. And, all that stuff started coming together. 3D Man should not be in it. I took him out. And it was one of those things where a lot of the people in the various offices at Marvel liked it. So they would occasionally they'd get to it. Here's the way it really works. People don't think comics work like regular companies, but they do. They would get to say like the end of a quarter and they'd realize like, we actually have some money left over. And it's funny, you don't spend it, you don't get that money again, So they'd often call me and the editor up and hey, do you guys want to do like a 3-issue miniseries of one of the Atlas characters or something like that? And I would always go, yes, I always did. because I had tons of stories for them. Like we did the Uranian miniseries, we did a Gorilla Man miniseries, a one shot with Nomura, and so I just took every chance they gave me to jump in on them, and it's one of those things where at the time, Civil War and all that stuff was going on in the main Marvel books, and we weren't really part of it. But that's also so people weren't paying attention to us as much as the other stuff. But that's also why we got to do good stuff. Like no one was messing with us. We really got to like go somewhere with the story. You see, like in the Dark Reign thing, we do a little thing with Norman Osborn and stuff like that, and had the Sentry pop up, and like he gets taken down really quickly by Venus because it's like everybody forgets Venus is the perfect one to throw against somebody super powerful. Just you take the fight out of them right away because they just start thinking about love.
Let's put it in lightly.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I can't complain that Marvel didn't push it so much because it wouldn't have been what it was if they had been really behind it. There would have been too many cooks touching into the pot. And it works. It works the way it works because it's a relatively small group of people guiding the vision of it, I think, and getting it's getting the tone just right.
Yeah,
Brevoort, I remember, put me through the ringer with the original pitch. I just kept turning in the first issue over and over, ordered, and then later on he told me, he goes, "Well, now that we all know what it is, you should have pitched it as Marvel's Rat Pack." And I'm like,
wow, I can see that.
Yeah, I'm like, that's great. And that's exactly what I should have done. And I wish you would notice that then. It saved me a lot of time.
Yeah.
But it does work that way because we have more humor than a lot of the others. And, I thought it was kind of interesting. Like, even though they don't use the whole, the story that we had for Jimmy Woo, where he's kind of recreated and rebooted to himself in the 50s as a young guy, in the Marvel movies, it certainly seems like the writing and Randall Park kind of took the sort of, Jimmy's sort of simpler worldview from the thing, and has him just, they play it up a little bit for laughs because he's not the main character in Ant-Man or anything, but he's definitely somebody you can't take your eyes off of every time he pops up on screen. Yeah, yeah, and everybody, I don't want to just slam everybody. Everybody else, when a lot of people, when they get a hold of Jimmy Woo, they think we'll make him this badass guy who does this. Like then he's just like everybody else.
Yes.
Like if you have him just come in being a very serious ass kicker, there stamp him out. It's the fact that he's kind of a man out of time in the way he perceives things and the way he forces the group to go to bed early and make sure they eat and do.
He reminds me of a really good, especially in this 2006 run. I felt like I really got a good idea or grasp of his characterization, or I just appreciate it a little more, just being a little older now, and et cetera, et cetera. He he's a very likable, enthusiastic guy, and to your credit, he doesn't need to be the complete badass because he's got a bunch of badasses on the team, like M11, Monkey Man, Nomura, like you said, and he kind of reads like, oh my God, why am I drawing a blank? Phil Jackson. He's like the Phil Jackson of comic books, Like he's able to bring all these like alpha, maybe not alpha males, well, actually literally an alpha male Monkey Man. But anyways, he's able to bring all these alphas and these, gods together by just being likable, enthusiastic, honorable. They kind of see the best of themselves in him, even though everyone is kind of like a broken character.
My take on them was always they're the team of second chances. Like everybody,
yes. Well said.
Everybody in Atlas gets a second chance, and they're making the most of it. So like, and they don't leave each other behind. It's not a bunch of quibbling. Like so in the original story or whatever, where Nomura says, "Here's a robot I found on the ocean floor that Bob fixes up." Then the robot is the one who he kind of returns the favor. He remembers through some detail he's observed that she's probably still alive, and they go after her and break her out of ice.
Hmm. Can I say
Um,
one of my favorite issues from this particular run? I think it was the end of issue 4 or 5. They just kind of got done fighting amongst themselves in a major way due to a revelation. And when Jimmy Woo steps up and is like, guys, we got to stick together. We got a bigger, mission at hand. And I think he says, now let's just shake. Let's make up.
yeah,
And the viewpoint from the what's his name, Derek. He's the Shield agent that's
yeah,
tagging
right,
along.
Derek Kanata. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought, Jeff, the way you wrote his internal monologue and being like, man, he's surrounded by literal like superhumans, robots, a monkey man, and he's the most inspiring. He's the glue that holds it all together. And I want to be the leader like Jimmy Woo is. I don't know, that like really touched me as someone that like also leads teams at works and is always thinking about how to be a leader. Um, Great issue, man. I'm
well,
over here
thank you.
gushing about this 2006
No,
series, but
I feel like you people are afraid to put sincerity in some of these stories,
well, yeah, well
and
said.
I'm sorry, I feel like you got to do that and be a little vulnerable to make readers really connect. And then like later in one of the series you were mentioning, Derek is now like finding out like when Shield is being disbanded in the greater Marvel story, like he's literally worried about how to support his family and stuff like that. And Jimmy remembers him. Jimmy comes
Hmm.
back and says, "Can you kind of take charge of the whole underworld of Atlas, like our thing below San Francisco, and help us out?" And brings them in. So it's like that. They always come back for everybody. And I don't know that to me that appeals to me more than this is a cosmic scale story that blah blah blah, something with the word war in it, and
Hmm.
it's like
It
I
feels,
feel like when you narrow the focus, you can really get some good stories that people will vibe with.
yeah. Well, well said. It feels like just a very grounded and like the characters just feel real. Like the bickering, the problems they're going through, their emotions. So kudos on that. And I also want to give a shout out to the series artist at the time, Leonard Kirk. I felt
Oh yeah,
like he drew exactly the art that was needed for this story, for this very grounded, sincere story. And Leonard Kirk, ever since then, has been one of my favorite artists. So it's been a treat. And I guess to the listeners who might be a little lost, this particular series, Agents of Atlas, all of it is available on the Marvel Unlimited app. In my case, I was lucky enough to find 2 very nice hardcovers for half off at my local bookstore. So
yeah, you can't beat
best,
the real books. I mean, go to Marvel Unlimited if you have to, but
but no.
if your local shop is as good as his, go to that and get a book.
Now, Jeff, on the topic of fan reception and just thinking about that, one thing I like to do, in terms of like my research is I'll have to go to your website, I'll read the bio, I'll see if there's a Wikipedia, I'll see other resources, but I really like going to Reddit and finding anecdotes. What are people talking about? Said creator, the overall reception on our comic books or our community online community. And I gotta say, there's some very positive headlines and things being said about you over the years on Reddit. Some of the
Oh,
things,
good.
Jeff Parker is one of the most underrated comic book writers. Jeff Parker appreciation post. There was one on our comics 4 years ago, and then 3 years ago. Anyone here also like Jeff Parker as much as I do? And I don't know. I guess how does that strike you? Like, are you someone that do you reflect a lot on your career, considering that you've been in this industry since the mid '90s? You're still getting steady work. All the accolades that you've amassed. Like, how do you feel about your career, like today?
Uh,
And the journey and the trajectory that it's been on, and where you're at.
Freelancing is a weird, dodgy business, and I'm really lucky that people still ask me to do things. And I think what I'm happiest about is that they will ask me to do something wildly different from what they saw me do, just a couple of years ago. And because you got to watch it, you get pigeonholed really easily, and everybody thinks, "Oh, that's the horror guy," or that's the lady who writes comedy," or and then it's hard to get out of it. Um, and I think one of the things that helped me early on was when I wrote Thunderbolts. And, I had been doing X-Men First Class and stuff with very noble heroes up to that point. And then I got to do it just a bunch of superpowered dirtbags and the way they react to the world. And I think that really helped people not lock me down, and I'm grateful for that. But yeah, and like right now, I'm doing Zootopia. I've done Darkwing Duck. Like I think it's good for you because you write too much of the same thing, you can
Hmm.
fall into bad habits of just repeating yourself, and that's not good for your head, and it's not good for your ability to tell stories. You've got to keep stretching. And I still do like original material every chance I get. It's always a very hard sell. People want something they grew up with, and that's just the nature of the business. But you also have to keep trying, or you're never gonna, comics is never gonna make new things, and you're just gonna keep going back to the well on whatever character over and over again. But yeah, obviously, I'd like it if I had a whole theme park devoted to my creations. But
What do we owe?
yeah, yeah, but that's the way it is. You have to set your goals really high
Yeah.
to get to a nice average somewhere. So it's great. I like going to shows. My favorite thing though is instead of people bringing a giant stack of books, which is fine, I'll sign all of them. I like when people just bring like their faves and just
Hmm.
want to talk to me, because I'm happy to, one, I need to remember it. And two, I'm happy to talk about it and tell you what I was thinking. And even sometimes I remember stories that I didn't get to do. And it's like, oh, good. Now I can tell somebody at this show
Oh, wow. That's cool.
the parts I didn't get to do in the Red Hulk story or whatever because we didn't have time or something like that.
Now you're most known as a writer. Do you miss, but you started out as an artist. Do you miss doing interior work or mainline series? Like I guess what's the last? And do you I guess still keep your skills sharp? Do you draw like
Yeah,
for your own personal self?
I do still draw. And like I did Drew Moss and I did a Kickstarter book called Blighter about this tiger man who's uh, tracking down these monsters on our world. And for that one, I was like, oh, if I'm doing another original creation, I need to draw something. So I did an epilogue story in the back, and I got to do it just to make sure I can still hang. you know, I'm probably not as good at making the deadlines like a lot of. There's some serious badass artists now working in the industry.
Oh yeah.
You just look at anything, and you're like, how are people this good? I don't understand. Um, so that's one thing. It's like I and I also can write a lot faster than I can draw, which I think is usually the case, probably. But the drawing helps me to, and I still draw comics every now and then and do some covers here and there because I need to remember and not get too far away from what goes into a visual story.
Hmm.
And I want to. Part of the downside is a lot of times you're just setting up the perfect ball for someone to smack it out of the park, and then later they go, "Man, that artist ruled on that," and take them away from us before we're done with our story. And I'm like, uh, you don't think the picture had anything going on? And I don't mean to not credit the artist, but it's like that's happened a few times. That always burns a little bit. Um, but the nice thing is, artists have also gone to bat for me for the same reason. Like I remember at one point, let's see. No, wait, I can't go into some story. I'll tell you some off camera.
Okay.
Or whatever. But I've had artists who were offered other jobs because we were on a roll, and then they went, "No, I'll stick with Parker on this. We're doing good stuff here," and that means a whole lot. Like sometimes, for artists to ask for me or to do something like that, this just makes it sound like I'm making things up. But I'm just
You're like,
remembering.
no, I swear, they
I'm
asked
just
for me, my
remembering
name.
the meaningful things
Hmm.
because we started getting on this meaningful topic. Um, and so I do love to give the artists some room to just try to set them up with a very visual story, and then I change my script to fit them if
Hmm.
it needs to. Um, And I certainly don't badger them about changing things a lot, only if it's something that makes the story confusing or isn't clear will I ever chime in with a little note. I'm pretty quiet about, I think, a lot of notes. Because some people just hand off the script and they're done. And that's just not the way it works. It's a collaboration. You're supposed to go back and forth. And like on the Batman Santa Claus series that we did in December, I was working with artist Lucas Kettner, and Lucas would just keep coming up with amazing ideas that I didn't even have in the script. And I would just write to it every time, like, oh, this is great. Like, it just makes me look good too. But
Mhm.
it's like, it's all Lucas. It's, and
Yeah, one hand, what is it? One hand washes the other.
yeah. And so he and I had the rare situation where we live in the same place. So we were able to get together and have little meetings and just brainstorm bits and everything and make stuff better. And you don't often get that. Usually you're working with somebody, at least on the other coast, all the way in another country, something like that, on a different time zone that's hard to sync up. So you got to take advantage of it when
Hmm.
you can do it old school, like when everybody was in New York and they're all jammed in the same room. Uh,
On the topic of that, in terms of like the changes of how your work, the work process from being in a studio with the artists and maybe the editor and other writers as well, and kind of having like drawing on the energy there to, in today, what I hear a lot echoed about today's industry and, workflow, emails, different time zones. As someone that has been working in comics since the mid 90s, I think it's probably safe to say you've probably seen a lot of like watershed moments, like moments in comics that have changed the way the industry works, whether that be on the retail side, the creative side, etc. And earlier you said like, there's so many good artists out there, where they come from. And I think a lot of that might have to have to do with social media and it being a vehicle for artists who actually get their work out there, even though they might not be signed or have a contract with a major publisher. The fact that they can share their artwork on their own. And I was curious from your experience, like what are some of those watershed moments for you personally where it changed the game for you in terms of maybe how you did work, or how the industry, how you reacted with the industry or within the industry?
well, definitely everybody going to digital to produce the comics was probably the biggest thing. Like once you started, and we used to be working in Photoshop. Now most people work in Clip Studio, formerly Manga Studio, and that's what I draw in when I'm drawing. And by the way, I meant to get to this in the last bit, that a lot of what my art is now is a lot of times I'll just do a layout of something to send to the artist, because it's like I could sit there and hammer them with a mountain of words, or I could spend a few minutes drawing this rough and they
Yeah.
would get exactly. Because a lot of times when you describe something too much, it sounds like a lot of work and then you don't mean it that way. And you're like, no, 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 it's actually very simple. And like, I'll do that and I'll do some layouts and everything, especially if people are getting behind and I think it'll help. And if they're not insulted by me doing layouts, I'll do layouts. Um, and it usually goes over well. I don't mean it to be like, follow this exactly. I just mean it to like, here, get this
Yeah, here's a
idea.
framework.
It's like your first idea or whatever, and then gives you a jumping off point, because every artist looks at something and then thinks, no, I'd do it like this. But then you've already saved them tons of time from having to go to blank paper, put something down, and then maybe change it themselves later. Milt Caniff, who did Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon and stuff like that, when he was really successful later in life, and Steve Canyon, he used to hire a guy to pencil the whole strip, and he was going to ink it, but then he would just change everything about it. And I often wonder, like, who's that poor artist who never got to see his art to make it to the page? He literally just like paid the money so that he could get someone else's opinion, that he would go, no, no, I do it like this. And then he'd just redraw the whole thing. And
Mhm.
it's like, somebody must have been really frustrated and then occasionally happy when one of his bits made it in. And I've seen the art; it was all great. So, but he just used it to spur himself to, because I think everybody's always that's one of the motivators when you're making comics is like you like stuff, but then you think, but that's not how I would do it. And then you start doing your thing. And then if you do like it and kind of mimic it too much, it's a little weird, honestly. It's like, okay, there's already this person doing his stuff. Like, you don't need to just do a pale imitation of him. It'd be like, oh, Darwin Cook did this, so I'm going to just sit there and try to do Darwin Cook riffs the rest of my life, which wouldn't be a bad way to go.
Hearing you say that you provide thumbnails to your collaborators and artists makes me think that probably comes from your time working on animation boards and animation as well. One, is that true? And then secondly, how similar or different are comics, the outline, the pacing, the panels, etc., versus an animation, like drawing animation boards or layouts for animation? Because I hear like there's a lot of similarity, but with with comics also having lettering and clearly trying to tell like a story, there's definitely like some differences there. But just curious to hear your opinion. Like, what are like some of the major similarities or differences between drawing a comic book outline versus an outline for animation and storyboards?
Yeah. Uh, Storyboards and animation, which is stuff that runs in real time, is pretty different from a comic book. For one thing, you have to obey the 180-degree rule. Um, Generally, comics artists, and I saw this when I worked at Sony Animation, because they had tons of people who used to work in comics and then decided, no, I want a regular job, and they went to work in animation. And even though they were all generally pretty badass artists with serious chops, they still had to learn the disciplines, just like I did, of how animation and TV work. And like, you can't just keep throwing a billion different settings in there. Usually you have like 3 key settings that you're seeing during a show. Because otherwise what you're doing is creating just an enormous budget deficit where people are trying to like, well, now somebody's got to draw this whole thing and figure out how they move around in it. And all these animators have to do tons more work than they were going to do. It's a strange way of thinking. And, you're only thinking in terms of this one aperture, like the screen shape. And that's actually, I think it's really good for people because you can, even though I like wacky layout panels and stuff like that in comics, you can kind of rely on that a little too hard and get away from what's important in the story, or just like the acting and things like that. And doing stuff for live action like a cartoon really makes you do that. To jump back to Darwin Cook, he was there working on Men in Black while I was working on Big Guy and Rusty. And I had been reading his stuff at DC that had just started coming out not that long ago before then. And so every time he came in, I was bugging him about something he did or something he did over at Warner Animation. And he would just, he was happy to talk to me about all of that stuff. We'd just sit around and blab about that. He even did cool stuff like, I remember one of the things was the Agent J and K in Men in Black. I don't know if you ever watched the cartoon.
Oh yeah, I actually seen the cartoon before I think I ever watched like the actual live action movies.
Yeah, he did.
I grew up big time on the Fox Kids like network block.
It was really
that
good.
was like my jam. Yeah, oh yeah.
They had a lot of good stuff. And even though they kept moving our cartoon all over to every time slot, people kept trying to follow it. And then they finally they said, hey, they left it somewhere for 10 minutes and it started doing really well. And then, the Fox Kids was calling back Sony saying, hey, we'd like some more seasons of Big Guy. And they were like, sorry, you guys kept moving it and not renewing anything. So everybody spread to the winds and is working on other cartoons now. So that was too bad because I could have done more of that. And I thought it was a really well written show. But I was saying Darwin did he did some redesigns of the characters to make them easier to animate. And no one paid attention. They never did it, but I remember swiping one of those from The Office because I just thought they were cool. I was like, oh, this was good thinking. He was really thinking like he did over working on the Batman animated stuff, like Batman Beyond and
Yeah.
everything, and how to make something so that, artists are going to, you can see when there's not a strong design in a cartoon and they kind of warp around and don't quite stay on model. And that's what my initial job was. I was a cleanup artist, and I was supposed to go through to various storyboard directors and just redraw their stuff and do the in between bits. Not all the in betweening, because that was done in South Korea, but it was mainly to get all the characters on model as they were in the designs. And you would think it would be easy after a while, but like then when I started just storyboarding, I would look back at it versus the designs and I would go, wow, I am wildly off model. I keep having, like, I do my own version of Rusty that does not look like what Rusty looks like when you look at the original picture. It's so easy to do. And anyway, all of those weird disciplines are very focused for cartoons, and in comics you're encouraged to do your own style and your own spin on everything. So that can be a hard adjustment for artists to make when they're making the jump over to doing storyboards and animation.
Jeff, I had admitted in the intro, I watched I watched the cartoon as a kid growing up. Much later on, when I got into comics, learned that, oh, it was a comic book, first. Did you ever have a chance to meet Frank Miller or Jeff Darrow? Do you got any good stories from either of them?
I've every time I've seen Jeff Darrow, for some reason he's eating, so I've not bothered him.
You think
One
that's on
time,
purpose? That's a great strategy if it's on purpose. He's
I
like, just
guess
not
it's
now.
just I keep walking through restaurants where he is. I remember seeing him in I
You're like,
remember
Jeff.
seeing him and Mike Mignola eating dinner one night somewhere in San Diego, and it was just funny because Mignola looked like a smaller version of Darrow. It's like, wow, they scaled up this design on these creators. Um, I've met Frank Miller before. I don't know if I ever even said who I was or what I did or whatever. This was at Baltimore one year, and he just stopped by, and I was talking to Heidi McDonald, and then he told us some stories, and then floated away. He's a nice guy. I didn't bug him about year one or anything. Or, I was just listening. A lot of times that's what I do. I just keep my mouth shut,
Mhm.
try to remember what everyone said,
Good
so that,
strategy.
so that later I can tell everybody what I saw.
Good strategy. All right, Jeff. I know that I'm going to do a massive leap over a lot of your career and life story here, but
Well,
from
that's fine.
from
No one's making you do a thorough look back of
but
retrospect.
I feel like you've got some great stories, and I don't know if I have. I feel like this could easily be a 3-part podcast. But something you're on the topic of storyboard and working in animation, from Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot, mid to late '90s to fast forward, today. We're recording this February 2nd, 2025. Zootopia issue 2 comes out, I think, next week, which would be the 13th, if I'm not mistaken, or the 12th,
That
or
seems
something like
right.
that.
Yeah.
I guess, is it interesting to you that I don't know if ironic is the term here, but it's definitely like an inverse. You go from working as a storyboard or artist for an animated show to now writing a comic book based on an animated movie, and not just any animated movie. I learned, by the way, Jeff, that Zootopia was the third Disney animated movie to surpass $1 billion at the box office. I think it's still like it's in like the top 15 at this point. There's other movies, animated movies, that have surpassed $1 billion, but still, that's a huge accomplishment for a Disney animated movie. In this kind of day and age, where I won't say like they've lost the magic because it's freaking Disney, but you know what I'm saying? They're well past like their '90s prime heyday. I guess, like, do you feel? I guess what your thoughts on kind of like that inverse, being working within animation to now writing a comic about an animated movie? Like, is there any pressure to live up to any the success of the movie in the comic book? I mean, I know there's obviously like a difference, but do you feel any of that?
I actually to me, it seems kind of the opposite. I feel like people have absorbed that movie so hard, like I did, because I loved it when it came out. I was like, this is easily one of the best things Disney has done, and I don't know when.
Yeah, I think
And
they
I,
call it. I think that movie is part of what fans have called it, like their Reconstruction era. It's like some fan made like era of like new movies that Disney was putting out at the time, like your Frozens, your Zootopias, and
right.
around those movies.
Yeah, and since I'm such a 2D animation guy, I loved Lilo and Stitch. I was like,
Hmm.
yeah, they're still doing 2D, and then they quit doing it. And so I was prepared to like not like it, and then it was like, this is amazing. This is such a good movie. Um, but with everybody coming into it knowing the movie so well, it kind of clears the path for me, and it reminds me of when I did Batman '66. And that a lot of my job, I feel, is to make sure people hear those voices. It's like Judy better be acting in character, and you can hear her voice, and you better hear Nick Wilde doing his kind of thing. And so to me, it's all about like, I'll watch a little scene or something to prepare, kind of getting the vibe and everything before I'm working on the story. Because if they don't feel like the characters, then it doesn't work. Like so much of the humor and just the whole dynamic of it comes from the characters, which is the same thing you like in live action, I think.
Mhm.
Um, so it's like good. It's like I get to like I get to sit there and imagine Idris Elba's voice as Bogo, you know, and
Yeah.
when doing a scene with him where he gives out the assignments for the day. Um, but yeah, it's weirdly not a lot of pressure. Disney actually was pretty easy. Uh, they're not always easy. I don't think they would ever claim to be. Um, but once they approved our story, at least they've taken it pretty easy on me. So I guess I'm not accidentally doing anything that they're doing with the new movie,
Hmm.
is what I interpret it as. And I seem to be staying in character, I guess, or they certainly let me hear it.
Which, by the way, I was actually pleasantly surprised to learn there's a Zootopia 2 coming out
Yeah,
this year. I don't think they've dropped an official trailer. They're just like a really blurry camera
yeah.
footage from like D23, but it looks promising. It was one of my favorite movies. And I want to correct myself. I said Disney's Reconstruction era. It's actually referred
Renaissance.
to as Disney's Revival era, a period of animated releases that began in 2008. Zootopia was released in 2016. So it's like Zootopia, Frozen, Wreck-It Ralph, Big Hero 6, Ralph Breaks the Internet, which are some of my favorite movies. So I think it lives up to that.
That makes more sense. I thought Reconstruction, that's not quite something I would use
Yeah.
on the, if we're talking about the American
Yeah.
Reconstruction.
But Jeff, you said something about the reception to, obviously this movie having such a strong fan base. And I read in an interview where you were talking about having to be careful not to inadvertently echo fan embellishments and like working in like Zootopia fanfics or fan theories into your story and having to kind of like, maybe stay clear of certain Zootopia fan websites or whatever. I guess like what kind of fanfics or theories have you seen out there when it comes to like Zootopia? What is the Zootopia fandom like? Based on your research.
I know what you're going for, man. It's like you're not fooling me here. You're trying to get
I
me to talk.
promise. No, I promise. There's no ulterior motive. All right, I promise.
No, you're trying to get me to talk about that one they did where they are clearly a couple, and I am not. I never saw it, so I never that or the fact that they modeled it after Seinfeld's apartment for some reason.
Oh, I didn't know that one. Okay.
Yeah, go back and look at it. It's hilarious. But no, I do stay away generally from fanfic stuff because like I don't want to later sit there and maybe accidentally take something from it
Mhm.
or remember things wrong. Like, I try to stay just with the movie, and to that degree, I haven't even watched the extra Disney Plus stuff that they did.
Okay.
They did a little more stories beyond, but I thought No, they're probably going to not honor and not acknowledge that with the next movie. So I'm not doing that. I'm not even going to look at it. I just pick up right from the end of the last movie where you see Nick's now a police officer and he and Judy are riding around in their giant squad car, which I'm not quite sure how they can even drive because they're little animals. But and they go out and pull Flash over for speeding, which is a good setup and joke.
Mhm.
Because you're like, oh, okay, of course, like I should have seen that coming. I also haven't actually put Flash in the comic.
Oh, we
Uh,
gotta get a Flash appearance. He's like one of the best characters in the movie.
yeah, but when you think of it in terms of comics,
Ah, okay.
how many pages I would have to chew up to show Flash talking?
I'm sure Alessandro would love it though, because he could just copy,
Yeah,
copy paste.
just keep making his eyes slowly close and
That's a
yeah,
good point.
maybe if we do a little special where we have more time, maybe we'll finally have another DMV appearance so we can
Hmm.
have the sloths doing their thing. But that's part of the challenge. Going back to what you were talking about before, you got to make these work in comics, and you don't have the room to have people going at length talking like they would in a movie.
Yeah.
You have to pick and choose your words really carefully so that it feels the same and sounds the same, but in fact, you did it way more succinctly than they could do it. Then would make sense to do it in a movie. In a movie, that talking would be over in seconds. And but say Alessandro Rinaldi can hold you on a panel by doing a lot of detail so that in a certain place so that you're really paying attention here and not just blasting through. Some people read comics too fast, by the way. That's always been a big gripe of mine.
Hmm.
Like, don't just stand there in the store reading the comic. Just take it home and really, like, these
Absorb it.
artists spent a lot of time drawing this, and you're reading it in 2 minutes. Like, come on, take your time. Um, I think that's why a lot of readers like narrative stuff in comics, which I'm not that big on, but it's because it slows them down.
Hmm.
It's just a theory I'm throwing out there. You can shoot it down in the comments if you like.
Oh, uh, sorry. Uh, damn it. I was on a roll here. Jeff, one thing I like about you is that you are always putting a spotlight on your collaborators with your artist. Um, in this case, talking about the Zootopia comic and Alessandro Rinaldi, you said something about him in an interview that I was like, that kind of got my wheels going. You said that Alessandro is doing what it took hundreds of animators to do in the movie by himself. And when you frame it that way, it reminds me of the saying or this conversation I read somewhere about like the role of a comic artist, being your director, your camera guy. Well, maybe not
Your
director in a
costume
way.
guy, yeah, all
Yeah,
that.
like all of the lighting guy
The
and all of
acting,
that.
all of that. That's why a lot of people. You always see these people who come in from some other discipline and they think, "Hey, I want to do comics." Like, yeah, here's where the real money is, man. Come on in, and they always quickly find out what an overwhelming amount of work it is if you aren't someone who lived and breathed it pretty much early on, and was always working on it and used to it. Because then they find out, oh, like it's not simply, and it's why you can't just do AI, and you can't say like, here's a prompt and give me a panel, and you're just going to keep finding out, well, none of these make sense together, and besides the fact that everybody has 6 arms or whatever, they're going to
There's
find
no
out that it just
cohesion.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's like the thing about what the artist is doing, it's really thinking. It's like, it's not their hand is just magically good and they make a great line or whatever. They're constantly solving tons of problems as they go along. And that's what you got to do when you're working in any visual medium. You're always problem solving. You're always figuring out what to set up, like how to move the characters through space in a way that makes everybody believe this is happening within your own story. And Rinaldi's doing it. And again, like, yeah, of course he has the Disney material to work with, what all those artists did. Um, But then when you think of like a room full of people doing all that work and computers rendering and all the stuff that's going on, and he's got to make you feel that way uh, pretty much by doing a page a day.
Hmm.
It's not an easy job. It's and it's not going to be replaced by some plagiarism program anytime soon. So Alessandro is completely safe in his job.
That's
I
well
think.
said. Yeah, that's refreshing to hear, Jeff. That's actually a really good point. I didn't think about. Yeah, you can get what is it? An LML, language
Yeah,
learning.
large
Yeah,
language
yeah.
module.
You can get it to spit out an image, but to make a cohesive story is, I mean, like the same program won't spit out the same two images. Like there's no consistency there.
No,
So, there's no cohesion. So to your point, I never actually thought about that in terms of like a defense to that conversation that I think a lot of people are having about, what is AI's impacts to comic books, and, can it change the industry or the landscape? And the more I hear like, writers like yourself and other industry professionals talk about it, it's like, well, there's a lot of nuances and intricacies that, I just don't see, AI like replacing.
no, that's why whenever you see somebody trying to do an AI comic, it inevitably is just some astronaut girl. Uh,
You were thinking about the same one. Yeah. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
it's
Yeah.
always an astronaut girl, but I've seen multiple ones like this with a ton of
Hmm.
thought narratives going down because really they can't figure out how to do one scene to another. Like, uh, you start a lot of times on a page, you have an establishing shot, like here's the city of Zootopia at the airport where all the blimps are landing and everything like that, and then start following a character around. And there's no substitute for a human brain who has studied their craft, figuring out the mechanics of all that, and then going up beyond that, how to make it look really cool. Like simply just telling the story is hard enough, and then you got to amp it up to another level. Like, yeah, but what about this page is cool, and what about this gets something about the characters that we love and want to see? It's like there's so many levels there. You can't prompt your way to that. It's just like when you tell a kid to go do a go do a job, like it's like, come on, dig a hole in the backyard so we can put this tree in it or whatever, and they talk about it endlessly, and then you're like, dude, you're not going to talk the dirt out of the hole, just go back there with the shovel and work on it. Yeah, does this sound like something I actually yelled at my son about years ago? Like, it's like there's no substitution for that sort of thing. You've got to put the work in.
Hmm. Well said. Sorry, I want to verify something off your website, Jeff. Do you still live in Portland?
Yeah,
By the way. Okay.
I do.
What is it? What's in the water in Portland that makes it such a destination for and hub for like comic creators and comic publishers? Like in your eyes, what is it about the Portland comic scene that is so enticing to other creators and just being such a major comic hub?
I think it's just an evolution thing. Like originally, everybody was in Manhattan, and that's simply because that's where all publishers were.
Hmm.
So if you wanted to work on something, you had to go move to New York if you weren't already in New York, like say Jack Kirby, and you know, and so people would see you because out of sight, out of mind. You've got to show up.
Hmm.
People like you can only get like you were saying earlier. Social media has been a godsend for people getting their artwork out there and us finding talents that need to be working. But at the same time, you can only do so much as a faceless person sending out stuff.
Hmm.
Sometimes you got to go to a show or you got to go to the offices and say, hey, I'm a living person who will meet your deadlines, that sort of thing, so that people know what's happening. And anyway, so once to me, the big thing that going back to those watershed moments, the big thing that changed before even digital was simply like FedEx and DHL or whatever, like sending out, being able to send your pages in from another place. One, that was a huge help to cartoonists because then they didn't have to live in expensive New York and they could live somewhere cheaper and send their work in. Um, Now, I think a lot of people started kind of coming and visiting this area because of Dark Horse Comics, which started here because this is where Mike Richardson lived. So he did everything here. Lots of people came out, graduates of the Kubert School and everything, like Ron Randall, and he would come out, and then say like Carl Kiesel would come visit him, and then like the area, because in the rest of the country, no one used to know where Oregon was. They weren't even sure if it was on the coast. They just knew it was somewhere west.
Yeah.
And there's a trail and there's a game. And but then once people started coming out to visit, they liked it, and it used to be cheap to live here. Even I didn't make it for the total cheap parts. I kind of came in like right as the cheap stuff was going away.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get in, and like suddenly you start building a community. People just started coming out, visiting their friends, and then at some point they just started. It became a self-perpetuating thing where people hear about Portland, they come out. It had a big active music scene and just all the creative stuff, and then you find out people live here and didn't even, like the other day I saw Kelly Thompson and I didn't realize she lived here. I better check with that. She may not want that on there. I was like, I thought I knew everybody who lived in town. And I think it was just one of those things where it started building up. Who knows where the next place will be? But right now there are a lot, and our studio is here, and we often have people come in from out of town. Did a DC holiday dinner here and everything. That was pretty cool. But again, artists tend to thrive where it's affordable.
Yeah.
And Portland, of course, just like Greenwich Village in the 60s being thrown up as, oh, here's a real verdant artist kind of place to grow and blossom. Like, yeah, now try to buy a place there or rent a place in the basement, and it's just going to be a fortune. And sadly, Portland's gotten expensive too. So I don't know. I think maybe somewhere in Ohio probably might be the next big comics sort of melting pot. Who knows?
And I guess I just, just as a Jackson native and a little bias here, I'm gonna go ahead
Could
and
be
throw
there
Jacksonville,
too.
Florida, as living
Very
is cheap
warm.
here for now, at least.
It's cheap. It's warm.
Yeah.
It's the warm ocean, not the freezing ocean like we've got over
Yeah,
here.
exactly. Jeff, you mentioned the studio that you're at, which you gave me a quick little tour in between a little tech issues we were having. The studio being Helioscope, and that's considered it's the largest collective of comics creators. You guys have cartoonists, illustrators, writers, concept designers, graphic novelists, all based in downtown Portland at said studio. I was curious, who are some of the members of Helioscope? How did you get involved? And I guess what's been the biggest advantage of, even though I kind of feel like this is a very easy question here, but what's the advantage of being surrounded by like-minded creators? And I guess paint us the scenery. Like, what is it like working in that studio?
Like a lot of times, the whole studio, in my mind, revolves around Steve Lieber, who's currently working on Metamorpho with Al Ewing, and and they're doing a re-release of the Jimmy Olsen he and Fraction did. He's pretty much the center of the studio. Without him, the whole thing falls apart. And so yeah, there are people like him, Ron Chan, who you may know from Plants vs. Zombies.
Yeah.
Colleen Coover, who sits between me and Steve, who's been working on Bandit for the past few years and used to work with me on some of the X-Men First Class stuff, which was a lot of fun to have a little more cartoony version of Marvel. Anyway, we've had people go in and out all the time. Terry Dodson's still a member, and
that's right.
Even though he actually lives way outside of town, he's been getting into going to life drawing, which is great because, like, come on, Terry Dodson draws about as good as you can draw, but he still thinks he needs to go to life drawing, So he's been coming back into town, popping in the studio more often, and going to his life drawing sessions at night. Yeah, we often host artists when they're hanging out in town and need somewhere to work.
Okay.
Because it's like, okay, we've got either drawing tables or we've got tablets you can draw on, something like that. To me, the big draw of having a physical studio, everybody thinks the ideal is working at home, but the truth is, you get sick of working in your own place, and especially if your place is small, and and even if it's not small, you know, artists and writers tend to either end up working in the attic or the basement, and they don't get to work on the main floor because that's got to be somebody's bedroom or something. So
Hmm.
it's and you kind of go crazy, working by yourself when you're out. Sometimes, like when you're having an uninspired day, all I got to do is walk around the studio and see what people are working on, and then I get fired up and run back to my desk and start producing because I see somebody else doing something cool, and then I like, oh yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing, something cool, and then I go run back and do it. I think in almost any town, you ought to try to find the other creatives like yourself, and it doesn't matter that you two don't have a similar style or approach or anything. Just the fact that someone else is over there doing something creative and you're doing it together, you'll be surprised how much more you'll produce. Like you'll get
Hmm.
on a regular schedule, you'll start really turning, you won't drift all over the thing where you're up at 3 in the morning working, and which is like it happens to everybody. But like the studio itself kind of forces us all into normal work hours like the rest of humanity has. So that right along itself is a good reason. Also, I found an espresso maker for free and fixed it. So I brought that in, and now we have good coffee all the time. Like, yeah,
you, you were
that's
heralded. I can see. Did they throw a parade for you? Because I could see you being heralded as a champion. Coffee and artists just go together.
it does. It's like nothing makes you produce, especially in Portland where it rains all the time. Um, that may also be part of the production
Hmm.
uh, thing here is the fact that you have to stay inside and get your work done because it's just cold and rainy outside. So
Yeah. Well, now I might have to rethink my pitch to Jacksonville being the next comic hub
yeah,
because the weather
everybody's just
sometimes
going
is
to
really
want to go
nice.
out to the beach up there in Jackson.
Yeah. No one's gonna get nothing done. But Jeff, it's nice to hear you talk about the pros of being in person at a at a studio with like-minded folks, feeding off the energy. Because it reminds me of Ed Brisson. I had a chance to interview him
Yeah,
on the last episode, and he said something very similar. He was like, I was asking his advice for like aspiring comic writers and creatives, and one of his pieces of advice was like, go find your tribe, like be around them, like feed off their energy, share your ideas, be open to criticism, and like you'll never, like you're saying, like you never know what you might see someone else doing that inspires you to maybe do something different. I was curious, like, do you have any standout memories in terms of like maybe seeing a particular artist or like picking up a new technique or trying something different because of what you saw from a fellow, studio
oh yeah.
partner?
Speaking of the two I just mentioned earlier, Steve and Colleen, they were getting really sick of me never using Manga Studio, and like, also people if you don't draw and everybody knows you can draw, they will not stop hammering you to produce some art, and it's like I just like writing. I'm sorry, but um, and I get to work with a lot of cool artists. But one time I had to do the Telos book that Todd DeZago was putting together as an anniversary and a kind of thing commemorating Michael Ringo. And I had told Todd that I wanted to draw a few pages in it. And then I had to sit down and work on it. And I had only been working really with stuff in Photoshop at that point. And they just begged me, like, here, just open Manga Studio. And that was right before it changed to Clip Art Studio, or that it's called now, or just Clip Studio. And and I did, and then I realized, like, oh, it is just like Photoshop, except it's more suited for artists, and the movement feels more natural when you're drawing on the screen, and it doesn't feel like I'm pulling and trying to make the computer do what I want it to do. It's just like, oh, I'm just drawing. Um, so they really helped me with that by bullying me into using that program. And it's funny. I've seen other people who you would think of as total Luddites get into. I remember Ron Randall used to never, like, he just really didn't want to do digital at all, and then he slowly kind of poked at it and did a thing here or there, and now he's been doing his Trekker series that he does through Kickstarter, and he does it all that way.
Hmm.
And he flies through it. It helps you go fast. The downside is you don't have as much original art to sell to somebody who might want to collect your art.
Mm-hmm.
So I always try to like encourage people, especially when I'm writing scripts. I try to give them the page and suggest like, this might be the one you want to, because it's got a good Batman shot on it. You might want to really,
you might make some bank off of this one, right?
you might
Hold on to
draw
this.
this one on paper.
Wow. Okay.
Because that's a real.
That's very modest of you, Jeff. Very entrepreneurial of you, looking out for your partners.
Well, one, looking out for the partner, looking out for the people who want to own their art.
That's well said.
Because otherwise, they're having to do all these commissions in their spare time, and then their spare time doesn't get used for anything else except doing more drawing. So I always think it's ideal if you can do most of the issue in digital and then just do a few pages where it makes sense so that you have some physical pages and somebody can buy them.
That's genius.
I don't know if you've paid any attention to the auctions, but
Heritage auctions. You mean how they're always making
right now?
Yes, how they're always making headlines like especially like during COVID. It felt like every auction was like Batman #1 breaks new world record, 9.3 million or something crazy like that. But original, I know that it's had kind of like a trickle down effect to just original comic art in general being, going for a lot more, people like wanting to buy more original art. And I actually want to know, Jeff, like, do you still have like all your original art? Or were you someone that like, I'll just whatever, sell it for cheap, or I don't really need it?
I still have some. But I did, I used to go to shows and sell my art and everything, and now I mostly take books.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. And I still, but a lot of times I'll do a commission drawing at a show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, especially if people come up and they've already got a book that I can work in. I'll do that.
What's the strangest, really quick, what's the strangest commission request you've ever gotten? And then what's the most impressive one that you wish you would have kept for yourself?
Let's see. The one that probably perplexed me the most.
That's a great word. Yeah. Which one perplexed you the most? Just staying up late.
A guy, and he did more than once at a San Diego, asked for a commission where Supergirl was being weakened by kryptonite.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, all right. And then what, like the next time I had to do it, and it's always her laying there, kryptonite glowing, and she's going, and I thought, I don't know, man, like, why do you always ask for this? I finally asked him. He goes, it's like, well, I just like the damsel in distress sort of thing. It's like, why, does it bother you? And I went, well, it hurts her. I mean, I never saw that.
Man.
I had to say it, and I never saw that guy again, and he never asked for that particular type of commission. Like, why do you get so many of these? Because he would ask other people.
Interesting. Wow.
There was a guy in the 90s and probably going back into the 80s who would always go to the shows like in the southern states, like Heroes and stuff. And he would always, everybody called him Dr. Scuba. And he would always ask for a scuba shot.
Like superheroes in a scuba suit?
Yeah, I don't think they even had to be a superhero. He just wanted some woman scuba diving, maybe fighting a monster or something like that.
Interesting.
And and everybody would always go, it's him. You know what he's going to ask for. And then you get a lot of other people like that, they'll come around with a book and they just really were fans of one book and they just want characters from that book. uh, all the time. You know, it's kind of fascinating that subsection of fandom.
I was just about to say maybe the amount of intro psycho. It would be like interesting to have a psychologist like kind of like study that. What you can glean of someone's psyche
Uh-huh.
from their commissions. Like what art they want to see, what art they're willing to pay. Because I mean, I can't tell you how many artists I've talked to that have had like these kind of instances like you're mentioning, where it's like, yeah, it's just a very weird or very niche premise, and that's all they want. So I'm sure there's something there. Maybe like a Severance kind of show right there.
Yeah, it's yeah, there is. It does have a Severance quality to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of them. I think they enjoy the fact that they're getting to kind of play the role of editor and
Yeah.
ask
Huh.
you to do a thing. And sometimes they'll take that further. Like they'll ask for a commission from the artist, and then they'll go find someone who's doing colors at the show to color it.
Oh, like a jam piece.
And then they got to run around and pretend they were Stan Lee for a little bit or something.
Wow. I've never thought of it from that angle.
I've seen that a
Huh.
lot, and
There's
that's just my take. I could be totally
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, yeah. No, no. I think there's something here, Jeff. But on the topic of art, really quick, I wanted to mention this really interesting article I found on Popverse. I don't know. I think it was from like last year, but the title is DC comic creators Dustin Nguyen, Teeny Howard, Jackson Lanning, and Jeff Parker revealed the one and only time you, as a comic creator, should work for free. And I think it'd be much more interesting. One, do you remember this, or what you might have said at this panel? If not,
I do not remember
okay,
that.
all good. I'll give
What
you.
did I say? Do you
You
know?
said a free story. I think everyone on the panel was pretty much like, "Nah, you should never like work for free, even if it's for exposure." But I think you were the one of the like a different take on this approach. You said a free story led to 10 years of me working at Marvel. I woke up in the middle of night with a joke that was really funny. Then it goes on to say, noting that the sharing the joke, which featured Marvel characters, led to years worth of work at Marvel, including your, time writing Agents of Atlas, Thunderbolts, and Red Hulk. Does that, I guess, churn any memories? Like what? I
Yeah,
guess I got to.
now I remember because it was for Ape Company,
Mm-hmm.
and what it actually was, it did have a joke that I ended up using in Agents of Atlas, where a gorilla is firing 4 machine guns at the same time because 4 hands.
Yeah,
In
that
which
was actually an. I think that was an issue 1 of this Agents of Atlas series I
when
wrote.
M11's carrying him and he's
Monkey
shooting his
Man's
way
got all
out,
the guns. Yeah.
and that got spread all over the internet. And I had done a version of that in this little 10-page story, which was just about apes fighting in World War II. And it was kind of me just doing a little homage to Joe Kubert. And it was just something where I got up in the middle of the night because I couldn't stop thinking about the story. And so I did a rough thumbnail of everything, like what was in the story, and then so I could go back to sleep. And then I just thought, and I don't do this a lot because again, I'm also mostly on the don't work for free crowd. But when you're doing it for yourself, like I was doing, it's not really working for free. It's just something you want to make happen. And I did get paid for it because a guy I know was doing a small comic, and he ran it in there.
Hmm.
And then the comic ended up with editor I mentioned earlier, Mark Panicia, and that was right when Mark had been given the task of doing the Marvel Adventures books. And the whole marching orders of that series was they got tired of trying to do intro to Marvel books that looked like something kids might like. Kids never liked it. Uh, they decided, no, we won't make these look any different from the Marvel comics. These could be just the same artists, but they need to be standalone stories so kids and their parents aren't trying to find multiple parts of a story, when they're not used to reading comics and going into a shop all the time. So they just had to be done in 122 pagers. And I think I should just ask him, but because I keep speaking for him, but I think Mark was looking at it thinking, well, Jeff had no problem doing this in 10 pages.
Hmm.
22 ought to be a breeze, and it kind of was. Even though I would get like I did the Marvel Adventures Avengers book, and that had a huge cast. But at the same time, it's like it was so fun to do, and they just went along with my craziest ideas. So I had a really good time on all of those series. The first ones was Marvel Adventures Fantastic Four. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah,
Actually,
it really helped me figure out how to end stories because I had that hard deadline of like by page 22, this has to be a satisfying conclusion. And that I think helped me so much in life because after doing a few dozen of those stories, you really get, you know how to land the plane.
hmm.
You at least know how to not completely screw yourself so that you get to the end and like, I got nothing.
Would you say that it's maybe more difficult or easier to write, say, an all ages book like Marvel Adventures, like we were talking about, or this new Zootopia comic, versus, say, a comic like Thunderbolts or Future Quest or Batman, where there's a lot of continuity, a lot of history with the character, maybe a lot more editorial oversight? Like, I guess what's easier, or what's easier or more difficult between those two?
Yeah, when you're working with like when I did the DC Christmas stories, you are having to kind of go around to the various offices and like, can I borrow a cup of Flash, or can I borrow Mary Marvel for a minute?
Yeah.
And luckily, since I was working with the Bat office, they have a little sway there, where because everybody's going to want to borrow a Bat character at some point, or especially a villain. So I feel like it was kind of a little easier than a lot of times in the past when I've had to do that. Um, but really, people haven't given me too hard a time. Um, I think the only request I made in that storyline was I was like, we could have Supergirl. And they said, no, Supergirl's doing something like she's out in the real world flying around or whatever. And I was like, but you can have Superman. And I'm like, well, obviously I'm always going to take Superman. That's a no brainer. I love Superman, but it was just a little odd that I couldn't get Supergirl. I just thought, well, she didn't get to meet Santa, you
Hmm.
know. Yeah, it's the continuity thing can be. It used to really be a pain at Marvel. Like you would ask to do something and like, no, this character's doing something in another book right now, and I'm like, well, it could be going on at different times. Like,
Hmm.
I won't
Yeah.
negate whatever is doing. And I always feel like they're afraid, like you're going to make fun of our character, and I never do that. That is not a thing I do. If anything, I'm going to make the character seem cooler than they normally do. That's a little dig, but yeah, it's it's not really that bad. Writing all ages stuff isn't, to me, it's not any harder than anything else. I just have to get in the mode for it. I have to, and same thing like you write in Thunderbolts or something where it's a little more lewd and and meaner spirited. You
Hmm.
kind of got to get ramped up for that, and it's better to like sit down and try to write a bunch of them. When I was doing Thunderbolts, that's when Marvel started experimenting with the doing twice monthly stories,
Yeah.
the issues. And that worked out fine because I had a ton of Thunderbolts ideas that I wouldn't have had room to do. And right then, Declan Shalvey came in and he did this Man Thing standalone story. And then they were loving what they were doing. So I asked, like, well, can I then split the group into two teams and I'll keep one story with Kev Walker and one with Declan? And they were fine with that. And that's how it was able to happen. And it didn't make for the thing I don't like, where you're just constantly switching artists in middle stream,
Hmm.
which makes it look like you just didn't plan things well or somebody got behind. And readers will tolerate it if they think, oh, well, this story sticks with Kev and this story sticks with Deck. Then it makes sense. It's like we're seeing it through different directors' eyes or something like that.
Yeah. Jeff, one thing about your career that I find fascinating is that there seems to be there seems to be a good amount of, like, an outsider perspective, at least my perspective, like fresh restarts or new, like, chapters and beginnings. Like, you break in the mid '90s, you're working at Malibu, you're drawing like Wonder Woman, some other DC stuff, and then you pivot to drawing storyboards for animation. Rusty Big Eye and Rusty the Boy Robot, and then there's like a chunk of years where you're not working in comics, and then you get back in with the Marvel Adventures, and then it just seems like your writing career just explodes once you're back at Marvel. You know, Thunderbolts, Agents of Atlas, Hulk, and then obviously the DC stuff, and now what you're doing with Dynamite. At what point in your career did you feel like I made it? You know, like because you can kind of like
Never.
point. Really?
Yeah, I don't think you ever feel. It's weird, you know. Somebody was saying just the other day, like I just started on a thing, and I suddenly feel like I've never done a story before, and I
Hmm.
absolutely related to that. You're
Interesting.
like, oh, it's like I'm starting from scratch, and I don't know what I'm doing, you know. And it's like, um, and I think it's probably healthy. At least I'm going to tell myself that. I feel like you should, if you can't approach it fresh and walk into it like that, you're probably doing repetitive stuff. And I really don't want to repeat myself, except once in a while if I think there was a line or a scene or something in a story I did that no one really saw. I'll totally break that back out again. It's like, no, that was a good bit. I'm using
Yeah.
that again. Sometimes I'll do it on purpose just to see if people will catch it. Um, or keep a running joke that goes on in completely different continuities that have nothing to do with each other. And like, you got to be a pretty hardcore Parker head to catch that stuff. But it's you got to amuse yourself once in a
Yeah.
while.
I guess what brought you back to comics, or what keeps you in
I was
comics?
never really out of it. I was the time period that it looks like I wasn't doing comics. I was doing my graphic novel, The Interman, which
Okay.
was I was doing it in my spare time. And it was 120 some or 130 pages. And so it took me a few years and in my downtime to do it. Um, so I was never really stopping with the comics, and storyboards helped because storyboards paid well enough. Like I would work on a commercial or a music video that, like if I didn't work for a couple of days, I could work on my comics and it was okay. I was still going to make my rent, that sort of thing. That's when I was living in Los Angeles.
I gotta ask, what music videos have you storyboarded?
I just mentioned one the other day, and like a lot of them were for bands I never heard of again. Like you would just
Yeah, one and done.
well, I
One hit.
can't remember who they are,
Yeah.
but I was joking on Blue Sky the other day about Nelly playing at the Republican inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, this is a bummer, man. That one of my favorite memories of storyboarding was working on one of his videos. And I went out they were shooting at Hollywood High. And the one I was there this is a lot of artists will get why this is important. But it was because I was able to come in and solve something really fast. And I had the great setup of the fact that they had already, the Famous Frames, the company that I was working through, and they would represent you and take a cut and everything, but they'd find you a ton of work. And so I went out there and they're shooting Batter Up, which I don't know if you remember the song or the video.
Yeah, they were. I mean, as the name would imply, it was like a baseball field, right? They were all like going up. Damn, I
And
have not remember. I feel like you just unlocked a memory of
your Nelly
watching.
knowledge is
Yeah, just been unlocked. Well, I mean, here's the thing. My sister was huge into Nelly at a time that I wasn't quite into, like, just mainstream music, especially like
yeah.
at that age. But obviously, like, I'm familiar with a lot of that. I mean, am I on the ball? Like, no
Yeah,
pun
no, you
intended. Am
got
I on
it.
the ball? Okay.
It was and the thing
Batter
was
up.
so when I went out there that day, they were shooting Batter Up.
I definitely. I just looked up it up on YouTube really quick, and the thumbnails. Yeah, I definitely remember this music video, which is
Yeah,
just like a lot of the other.
well, it had Sherman Hensley, and I was like,
Oh, that's right.
and I'm walking with somebody, and they're like, "There's Sherman Hensley," and we're like, "Oh wow!" And it's like I couldn't go bug him because he was doing his own thing.
Yeah.
So like they had him, he did the George Jefferson dance and
Uh-huh.
everything, and they were doing a riff on the good on the Moving On Up theme
Yeah.
song
Mm-hmm.
in that. But what I was there to work on was for the Ride With Me video, which was a takeoff of Smokey and the Bandit.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're riding around like truckers and stuff like that on CBs. And the thing was, I went in and I remember the rep who sent me out there. He goes, yeah, we've had like 3 other guys go in. They don't like what anybody's doing. It's like, I don't know, maybe you do more cartoony stuff sometimes. Maybe you can figure it out. And I was like, well, and you feel like, oh man, I'm really walking into something because he had no idea what to tell me what it was. And
Mhm.
I go out there to a trailer that's they're shooting at Hollywood High in Los Angeles, and it's classic stuff like they do in movies. Like it's the middle of summer, so really all the grass would be burnt and brown, but they've painted all the grass to make it look like the baseball diamond, and everything is
Mhm.
a normal field and everything. I'm looking down and they're telling me like, don't step on that. You're going to get it all over your shoes. I was like, this is wild. This is
Yeah.
classic stuff. And, and Nelly's up there doing at the pitcher's mound, and they're shooting bits of it. And then I go through and I go into a trailer, and they're like, yeah, we're doing this video that's like a trucker, Smokey and the Bandit takeoff. And no one seems to get this. Like, we want one of the girls like you see on a mud flat, but more like a fly girl.
Hmm.
And I was like, I got it. I like 20 minutes, I had it. And
Yeah.
if you look at the video, they put it really big on the back and the sides of the trucks.
I'm gonna have to.
Yeah,
You might. I think I'm gonna go down a Nelly music video rabbit hole after this,
yeah.
which I'm kind of excited about because Jeff, right now the amount of cool points you have in my eyes is through the roof. I did not know you worked one. I mean, you worked on one of the better Nelly music videos, but you
Yeah.
worked on multiple Nelly music videos, and
No,
I guess
no,
I'm.
I just worked on the one. I just got to see
But
the other one shoot
okay, I
because they
got
were
you. But
clearly doing them all back
yeah,
to back. That's the way they always do everything.
I
I
mean, I
usually would come in doing storyboards. I was usually brought in really close to the time they were going to be shooting the actors and stuff. And so I would have to, like, in a day, draw all these key scenes that the director had written down. And it is always funny to me. Like, I like going out because it's like, one, they'll have food, I can eat that,
hell yeah.
and I can draw the craft service. And then I'd be surprised, like I would just draw in little things to fill in space, and then people were out hunting down props based on like some lamp or something I drew. And I'm like, it can be anything. I really was just
Yeah,
like,
just a placeholder.
I just did that in a second. Like,
Hmm.
it's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to fit this vibe exactly.
Well, that's back when music videos had like huge, like almost movie size budget. I mean, maybe
Yeah,
not
they did
movie.
have big budgets.
They had huge budgets. So I guess like, yeah, I guess they had enough money to, waste time and resources looking for a very specific lamp.
They
But I
did.
I guess I knew that there were storyboard artists that have done music videos, but you look at a music video like a lot of those Nelly music videos, they just seemed very straightforward, right? Like he was in front of a crowd of girls, they had props in the back. There's usually like a theme, but I guess I never gave credence that even those what I might have assumed is seen as like kind of simple, straightforward music videos still needed to go through the entire process and have a storyboard artist like flesh it out and the sequence of events and things
Well,
like
I
that.
don't think they did do a storyboard artist for the rest of the stuff. I think they were just going off of, just setting things up.
Hmm.
And especially
Copy
if
and
you look
paste.
at and they were shooting stuff that didn't end up in the video. So I know that they were just like doing stuff that they thought would look cool.
Yeah.
Because, like, the main girl dancer in sorry, I keep calling her a girl, but, at the time they would always
Video
refer.
vixen. Yeah, she was a video vixen.
Yeah. And, like, I remember seeing her, they kept shooting like everyone dancing in the bleachers. And I don't think that ended up in the video at all.
Okay.
And, but the one girl like totally went all diva, freaking out because a bee flew near her. And, she's just going off about this bee. It grinds everything to a halt.
Yeah, that's
And
funny.
I was like, this is classic. I
Yeah,
was like, man, I'm really getting to see all the Hollywood stuff today.
yeah.
This was amazing.
I guess.
But
I guess.
I was just brought in just to do this silhouette. I was
Hmm.
just like, for some reason, everyone was having a hard time with the description, and I was like, I've seen a million of those stupid things while driving across the country.
Hmm.
I know the truck flap silhouette. It's just always the same girl
Yeah.
sitting this way.
Hmm.
And I guess people were having a hard time, like, how am I going to make this fit the whole thing of the video? And it's like, I gave her like a high weave and some big heels and stuff like that in the silhouette. it was the kind of thing like in animation, it wouldn't have taken us any time to do.
Hmm.
And like, I swear in 20 minutes I was done and they went, thanks. And I was like, I felt like a hero and I was like, this was great. And I got to listen to some line producer complain about how she was being disrespected by the director the entire time. It was great. Like all this stuff where I just felt like I just come in and do this one simple job, and I
Yeah.
get to watch a bunch of Hollywood cliches playing out all over the.
Jeff, and it almost feels like that anecdote. I almost feel like it's maybe echoed a few times throughout your career. Like I really like, to boil it down, like just being there at the right place, right time, and just being prepared. Like you mentioned, like that 10-page ape story that found its way to the Marvel editor. You got your opportunity, and that led to so many other titles. I guess I want to go back to my question that I had brought up, but like I guess why comics? Like why have you what is it about the comic art form and industry that has kept you around so long when you've got the opportunity to do like storyboards and maybe go to all these other industries? What is it about comics?
Uh, Maybe it's because of the fact that you just get to tell so many stories, and with a relatively small crew, you can put together something that sticks with people, and do a whole comic. Um, like I do always want to work in movies and things like that, but it's hard to do that. It's hard to get your vision through without it being compromised many times along the way. And yeah, comics, like anybody who can sit down and if you can draw and write and if you can letter even or in color, like you can do the whole thing yourself. Probably not that fast, but you can tell a whole story that sucks people in. You see people all the time, like you see Dave Pilkey doing stuff like Dogman or Raina Telgemeier and all of her work, that is some of the top selling comics in the country easily. And it is because they don't even sell in comic stores; they sell in bookstores, and they're in libraries and stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
and like when Bill Watterson used to do Calvin and Hobbes, it's like that's just him getting his whole vision out. I like collaborating with other people, but I also like hogging the ball sometimes and doing more of the stuff. I mean, I think it's probably the difference of like if you were acting, you do a movie or something, then like you get to work once or twice a year, and but if you work on stage, you get to go out every night for a long time and get that instant audience reaction.
Yeah.
And that's, like a drug for a lot of people. And I totally get that. That's why I like doing the weekly series uh, at Christmas time because you get to have reactions like instantly,
Hmm.
and then like after a few days, another one's out. And, it's kind of fun. Like it's almost like having a TV show out.
Yeah. It sounds like a healthy way of like feeding like the
But you're
ego
right.
and
I should work in TV and movies. So,
you gotta Nelly needs was a better Nelly needs more music. Actually, I don't know if we
I
want to
don't know.
support Nelly after that.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't think I'm working with him again,
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
I don't blame you. Well, Jeff, on the topic of collaborators, I've got a list of four artists that you've worked with throughout your years of being in comics
Mhm.
that are some of my personal favorites, and I would love to hear any stories, memories, or words that come to mind when you hear these names. Okay.
Okay.
And obviously this is not a very a comprehensive list of every artist. These are just some of my favorites. Maybe you could share some stories at the end of this, but I'll start off with Kev Walker, who you worked with on the Thunderbolt series for Marvel in 2010, which was a personal favorite, one of mine, and I think my first introduction to Kev Walker. So what comes to mind when you think of Kev Walker?
Uh, the great thing is when I started working with him, like I was brought onto Thunderbolts a few issues before that, and I'm certain, pretty much at that point, I was just there to run out the clock on the version of the Thunderbolts that Warren Ellis and Andy Diggle had been
Mm,
doing,
yeah.
and I don't know. It was funny because the artist and I, at the time, our stuff didn't really go together at all. I was like, a lot of people tell me they enjoyed it. I was like, this, I don't, I feel like our tones just clashed terribly. Um, and then Kev came on and I wrote up the story the way I wanted to do it. I didn't know how Kev was going to approach it, but then he kind of came in with his big over the top stuff and his kind of mean sense of humor, and it hit the tone so dead on that then it was like a power up where suddenly I could like, oh, I can go farther with this
Hmm.
because Kev can go farther with this,
Yeah.
and it was funny because at first, like, I'd write to the emails and Kev wouldn't respond to me, and I was like, man, does he not like me or something? What's going on? How come he never says anything in the emails and stuff? And I think it was like, he had worked with a lot of writers, and he's been a writer himself, like on the young James Bond stuff. And I think he probably thinks we're a bunch of, whatevers. Like what wasn't willing to sit there and do small talk or anything. But then at some point he just suddenly broke down, wrote me a long email and like, and we got along great. He was just like, I think you get a lot of people, I don't know, trying to treat you like their illustrator or something like that, who's just supposed to do their puppet shows or something like that. And I think he got that I wasn't that way, and that like I was going to follow his leads often. And so he felt a lot more freedom, I hope, because we certainly had a blast on the thing. And then I started taking a lot of his ideas. Like once the editor came back and said, "Hey, we've got Man Thing," and I was like, "Well, we didn't ask for Man Thing, but I'm not going to turn down having Man Thing in the book." And then I realized, like, oh wait, I could do this scenario where Man Thing kind of functions as the jet
Hmm.
and takes every. Then we don't have to keep having scenes where they go get in the jet and then land the jet and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. A lot of shoe leather, as they call it in Hollywood. And it's like, it'll be much more fun if Man Thing just opens a portal for you and then kind of bumbles around because he's not quite into whatever you're doing. And then if he does help, it's like a special thing, like, oh wow, Man Thing actually pitched in. And Kev early on suggested, like, we're going to have him learn to talk, right? And I went, well, if you want to, we can do that. And then we ended up making it, a pretty big storyline where like he goes through this whole kind of death and rebirth thing, and then he can talk. And Satana is a big part of that. I remember here's the one thing that really sticks out besides all of the great stuff Kev did. There's one scene where I have Satana joining the team, and she's going around. She's making a big deal out of Man Thing, and then she's going and she's kind of manipulating everybody. And then she's talking sort of seductively to blanking on her name, the blonde. I know this is annoying. Like, oh, did you really work on this series? Like,
No,
sorry, my head was a million different colors.
oh,
Moonstone.
she, yes, yeah, yeah, she
Yeah, so
radiates.
she's going up, floating around Moonstone. I don't know why I was having a hard
Moonstone.
time with that. I think because my brain was saying Moon Knight, and like
Hmm.
Moon Knight wasn't in the book. Um, and the way I described her being up close, Kev just couldn't help himself, and he just totally drew her reaching around and grabbing Moonstone in a way that you can't show in those rated comics that we were doing.
Oh, wow.
Uh, so, and it's like, and I was saying, like, hey, that's not what I put in the description. Don't yell at me, like,
That's
but
funny.
also don't yell at Kev because this is a cool looking panel.
That's cool.
Anyway, they ran with that, and the editor solved it by dropping the word balloons right over the grabby part. And then like I was up at 5 a.m. I just woke up at an odd time or something one day, and I had that. And just for fun, I threw it up on Twitter, and like in no time, I had people calling saying, "Can you take that down?" From the office. And I was like, Yeah, I was just making it as a little reward for people who were paying attention or something. And it probably was only up for 15 minutes, but it's easy to find online because people will screen grab something so fast when you put
Oh
up
yeah.
something, and they know when something's not supposed to be revealed and you did it. So I
Oh
said,
yeah.
"Hey, here's the thing without word balloons. Take that down." And so that was totally Kev just like saying, "Screw it, I'm going to draw this scene the way I see it."
Nice.
Um, and that's the essence of Kev Walker right there. The guy's a super talent though. He's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolute badass.
Oh, and
All right.
Frank Martin was coloring him, and I felt like Frank's one of those guys who he can like crack the code on any artist he works with. Like it may take him a couple of issues, but he'll figure out the right approach for them. And a lot of colorists, I don't think, as good as they are, can't do that.
Hmm.
A lot of people just simply do what they do that looks good. But that guy could focus on different artists and like, here's what's going to look good with them. And he did it with Walker. He did it with Shalvey,
Yeah.
and he still does it every time I look at anything he's doing. I'm like, oh yeah, he's easily one of the best colorists working.
Agreed. All right. How does Mike Allred, who you worked with on Batman 66 for DC in 2013, give me one memorable story or a memory or I guess any keywords when you think of Mike Allred?
Yeah, Allred's great. He would always do the covers. Like they'd call and ask me like, what's going to be in this issue? And I said, I think King Tut or something like that. Like we were often going so
Call me
far
back at
ahead.
5. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and some alligators, maybe crocodiles. I mean, because we're going to have Killer Croc be created in this, and then he would go nuts on, Allred would do whatever he would do, and then a lot of times I would look at his and like, how can I make the story more fit this cover that he just came up with that didn't really have to do with what I was going to do. So it would kind of create a fun little back and forth where I would come up with something extra a lot of times just to make sometimes I would let it just simply not have anything to do with the story inside. It didn't matter as long as the cover looked good anyway. I'm trying to remember, there was one that I could tell Allred really got into. Like I was doing a takeoff of The Man with Golden Gun or something like that, and it was something else entirely. But it was something that was like he was really into, and he spent all this time on it. I was like blown away, and I'm sorry I'm not remembering which thing it was, but it just happened to we hit a sweet spot with him on something, and I guess you're going to do that because I probably like a lot of the same things Mike likes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, yeah, it was always fun watching his covers come in on that. But then he and his brother ended up doing the final story of the series, where and it makes sense for the final story, but it's where they did the like explained the title sequence that you would see at the show, where all the gangsters are coming in, they're fighting them. Like they actually went back and figured out a story to go with that, which I
Oh
thought was
wow.
pretty clever.
Yeah. That's a really cool way of looking at an existing, thing and then finding like the space, like, oh, where can I tell like an interesting story from like this one minor minutia maybe thing.
Yeah, they made it work.
Yeah, and Mike Allred to me is his creativity is like through the roof, so it doesn't surprise me. He found like this very
One of my the initial disappointment that turned out to be great was on X-Men First Class. We were doing an annual, and Mike was supposed to be doing one of the stories. So I wrote it thinking very like, this is very Allred stuff. He's going to like this. And it's where they go to a beatnik bar, and then they have weird hallucinations. And I thought this is going to be right up his alley. And then like Mike could only do like part of it, but he brought in Nick Dragata, who I didn't know
oh,
at the
wow.
time. And yeah, Nick's new on the scene.
Yeah.
And then Nick drew it, and it was amazing. And I'm trying to remember if Mike inked it or Nick just inked it. But that started a friendship for years. Like Nick and I have worked together on tons of stuff, stuff that's not even in like the regular big two comics and things, and have been good friends ever since. So that was, yeah, the one time Mike turned down a job still worked out. So
Oh,
yeah, and Nick, of course, is the king of the industry at the moment for working
yeah.
on
He's a behemoth.
Absolute Batman.
Yeah.
He's such a good guy.
That's
Get him
awesome.
on the show. You'd have a good time with him.
No, Jeff, if you can help me set that up, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
No, I'd absolutely love to have Nick Dragot on the show. Okay, and then what comes to mind when you think of Evan Doc Shaner, who you worked with on Future Quest for DC in 2016, which might I say was one of my favorite. Just kind of, I wouldn't even say. I mean, it is kind of like a crossover, but which I find interesting in relation to your time as a storyboard artist working on animation. You're working on this series that's bringing back like classic Hanna-Barbera cartoons and bringing them into like the DC forefront. What was it like working with Doc Shaner on that? Anything memorable?
Oh, it's fantastic. And that was like the culmination of our big run together because we had
That's
started
right.
working at Dynamite on Flash Gordon.
Oh yeah,
And
that's right.
I'm still really proud of those Flash Gordon stories, and Doc knocked it out of the park every time. Um, he always like draws characters with a lot of heart. And that's one of the things, like somebody else can do a very flashy one, but there's few people who can do like him where it's like, oh my God, you just with a simple drawing made me care about this character I normally don't even like. But that's the power that guy has. Um, and he and I at the time were working on we were doing this 2-part when DC was doing the move to the West Coast and they were doing the Convergence story. So we were doing the Marvel family, which is, right up his wheelhouse. He loves Captain Marvel. And and then they were talking to me about no wait, I'm sorry. Yeah, they surprised me with the Marvel stuff. I was like, it, they had already contacted him and got him to agree to it while we were still working on Flash Gordon. And then they said, "Well, we've got somebody on the Captain Marvel story, Marvel family. I think you'll get along with." And I was like, "This is going to be awful." And then they said, "No, it's Shaner." And I was like, "Oh, he didn't tell me." Um, but then from there, that's when we went on to the Johnny Quest stuff. And to get it back to Darwin Cook, I'm pretty sure it's because Darwin suggested. Uh, like I think they initially talked to him about how to do a big crossover with Space Ghost and Johnny Quest and
Hmm.
everybody. And Darwin had just read the Flash Gordon stuff, and he said, "Get Parker and Shaner."
Wow.
And he's like, "I'll help them do the whole pitch for it." And he did. He initially gave me some cool scenes that he had thought of. He said, like, I don't know what the story is, but here's what I picture: like Johnny and Haji zooming around in jetpacks in the jungle of the Everglades, and then they find the wrecked Phantom Cruiser and stuff like that. And it was perfect intro stuff, and and it was exciting for me because I got to see that Darwin thought of stories came to him the same way they come to me, where they don't quite all make sense yet, but I'm getting scenes that
Hmm.
need to be there. And sometimes you have to go back and drop the scenes because they don't work with whatever you came up with. But I made everything he said work.
Yeah. Like I
And
said,
then
that run was awesome. I mean, from the writing to I mean, obviously Doc Shaner and Steve Rude at that too. The concept. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And as someone that grew up on Hanna Barbera cartoons, there was that nostalgic fact. I think I actually ended up buying that series for my dad, who was kind of like falling out of comic books at the time, but
uh-huh,
like he found
did
a
he
lot
like
of
it?
joy. Oh, he loved it.
Oh,
Love. I
good.
mean, he wanted so much more, and I think DC knew they had something on their hands because the amount of series that spun out of that Future Quest series was it was an embarrassment of riches if you were a fan of Hanna Barbera cartoons at the time.
Yeah, it was. It worked surprisingly well,
Yeah, big
and
time.
like we did little things like Evan kept drawing Dino Boy, and he wasn't originally part of the pitch. But then I asked Marie Javins, who now runs DC. I like Evan keeps drawing Dino Boy, and so she went and got it. So like, well, if he wants to draw Dino Boy, he can be in the story. I went, okay, good, because I actually already wrote him in, but I didn't tell you. And then, so like, again, you got to accommodate the artist. If they're feeling something, they're onto it, and
Mhm.
it's like, don't ignore that. You're just going to shoot yourself in the foot if you don't. Um, Evan's one of the easiest artists I ever have to work with, because I feel like he and I are so thoroughly on the same wavelength a lot of the times. Like, I write a script for him different than I'd write for anyone else. Like, I will, because I've gone back and looked at some of our scripts together, and it's like practically incomplete sentences because I know he's going to know what I want. And it's like, here's how you're going to do it. I know how you're going to do it. And then
Hmm.
he leaves that behind and does his own thing. Um, like, one of the last things we got to work on, they were doing an anniversary special for Aquaman, and Evan had always wanted to work on Aquaman when I was writing it, but like, there was no room for it. And so I was like, "Oh, can we ask Evan? Like, he always wanted to do an Aquaman story, and it's like, this will be fun to write one that's like a standalone story with him." And that's one of my favorite things he's ever done. I feel like he really killed on it.
Wow.
So yeah, I always love working with him, and
Yeah.
so hopefully we'll get to work together again. It's like, he's easily one of my favorite collaborators.
My fingers are crossed for sure. I would love to see you guys team back up. All right, and the last artist on my list, and this one's kind of like a twofold question, but also I think very kind of topical considering the new Captain America movie that's coming out that'll feature said character here. But I wanted to hear your thoughts or what comes to mind when you think of Gabriel Hardman, who you worked for on a couple of series, both on some Agents of Atlas stuff, but also primarily on Hulk for Marvel in 2010, and you were coming right off of the Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness Hulk series where they introduced Red Hulk. So I guess I want to hear about your experience working with Gabriel Hardman, but also what does it feel like? Like you were working and writing Red Hulk, and now you get to see him live action. Does that, I guess, do anything to you and your perspective on your career? Like, does it? I don't know. Is it like I don't know. Like, I guess what are your thoughts on seeing like a character that you were writing for so long finally make it to the big screen and the excitement for it and that? What type of reflections do you
Yeah, I definitely wasn't picturing him as Harrison Ford, so
have?
that's
Yeah,
that's
I
pretty
still can't
wild.
really see it, but
It's weird, I don't,
it is.
in a way, I don't feel connected to it at all, because I just feel like the comic's the thing that I was doing, and this is something else. But then sometimes you'll watch it and you go, "Oh, they used our thing." Like in the Aquaman movie, they used a lot of what Paul Pelletier and I were doing with Aquaman's mom, and it's like, "Oh, that so you did read the comics," and it was like, "Good, now give me some money." And and but working with Hardman was always great. He's a good friend, and we still, like, we're trying to do some other stuff together where we just do, like, maybe where we both write and draw our own things, but it's connected right now. So hopefully we'll get. Uh, he's already ahead of me. Hopefully I'll be able to catch up on that. Um, and sometimes we would team up with John Suntress of Word Balloon and do our own little podcast where we just talked about old movies and TV shows and stuff like
That's right.
that, of real obscure stuff that people can't find. But yeah, he nailed. I loved when he came on to Atlas, especially because I was able to break it up so that, like, we had a separate timeline, and we're visiting Atlas in the 50s when they first started, and he was the perfect person to do that because he doesn't even have to look up reference. He's seen so much of that stuff. He could pull the cars and jets and clothes out of his head. Though he did research it, obviously, but it's like he just nailed it so thoroughly. Um, I was like, I loved working on Atlas with him. I felt like he really got a certain part of that, especially the final storyline that we did when they bring in the 3D man
Mhm.
as Delroy. And like, all the stuff he did on that, I think was just a pinnacle. All the Red Hulk stuff was great too, but I think he and I would have been happy continuing on for another year doing Atlas at that
Oh
point
yeah.
as well. But we switched over to Red Hulk, and I'm really proud of those stories too. I felt like we created some good villains that they still need to use. Um, the 01 character and Black Fog and all that sort of thing. Um, and the other Watcher that we had, Urevo.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's like, but the thing is, Hardman is likes to write himself, and he's a great writer. So I don't see us being able to team up in that way again anytime soon. Because why would he? He's just going to come up with his own ideas and write them. When he's not storyboarding whatever the biggest budget movie is of the year, which he constantly is doing.
Wow.
And it's always funny because you always find out later. Yep, he storyboarded that one too. Most of the Christopher Nolan stuff,
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and
Man.
let's see what else. Now wait, I can't remember. I can't talk about his career too much because like sometimes some of that stuff's supposed to be secret.
Yeah.
But
And it's all good. I mean, Jeff, you've shared more than plenty stories about all of these guys. So thank you for indulging me in that. Loved hearing that. And I honestly wouldn't mind seeing you team up with any of these guys for more future stuff. But I wanted to ask as we start getting to the finish line here. But Jeff, as someone that's been in the industry since like the mid 90s, and, we're talking about the different changes that you've seen. I guess what are your thoughts on the comic industry today? Like, I feel like the conversation that we're seeing a lot, especially like online, is are comics dying? Are they in trouble with the popularity of manga and anime? And then now, kind of staying topical, we're seeing like the possibility of what do these potential tariffs, look like for the comic industry and the price of comics and things like that. As someone that has seen, comic books, the industry kind of fluctuate in the good and the bad. I guess what are your thoughts on the industry today? Like, if you could change one thing too, also to add, if you could change one thing about it that you feel like is long overdue, what would that be?
that's a good question that I would have prepared for if you had sent me an email telling me about it. But the one thing that can get around weirdness like tariffs and stuff like that would simply be if we just read them digitally more.
Huh. So you're an advocate for better digital comic experience or
Yeah,
digital comics in general.
all I care about is that stories get read. It's like just because I prefer them in book form. Here's what going back to Batman 66. Um, at the time, I don't know if you remember this, but
Wasn't it a DC digital
it
first?
was it was
That's right.
it was digital first. Good memory. And so we had to do the stories specifically to be read in the digital format, which is why you didn't get any full page splashes. It always broke
Oh,
twos.
okay.
And and it was that way for a long time. And then at some point they said, okay, now we're not doing that. You can do it however you want to do it. And but it was good practice for like, okay, having to think digitally. And it seemed to me with Comixology happening at the time that it was just going to be, I figured like, oh, in a few years, we'll just be reading all monthlies digitally, and then we'll just buy the trades as a collection in paper, like, and they'll just sell like that. And I thought that's what I was sure was going to happen. And then Amazon bought Comixology and kind of forgot about it. And
Yeah, made it worse, to be honest with you. Made it
yeah,
way worse.
unfortunately, like I felt like we were really going somewhere, and then
Mhm.
it just dropped. And hopefully it'll start picking back up again. I think if somebody just makes a simple format in a way that everybody's comfortable with, and they know how to get the books, because that would really be a real equalizer where your smaller groups could potentially have as big as impact as any of
Hmm.
the big companies,
Yeah.
So and I don't see any downside to it. Um, and then again, once you get enough that you've got enough material, you could just print a paperback. It's like everybody gets what they want. That's what I hope will happen because it, like going when I mentioned the Blighter book, Drew Moss and I did. Um, one of the painful things was like I took orders for overseas, but I let everybody know like you have to pay for shipping. I can't cover that shipping because
Oh
those
yeah, it's
prices change
insane.
all the time, and it sucks because like somebody in the UK would order and they'd end up paying more for shipping than it costs to buy the
Ouch.
book, you know.
Mm.
And it's
Hmm.
like no one should have to pay that much to get the story. And that's why I always encourage us like if you're in these countries, please just buy the digital. It's
Yeah.
cheaper and you'll still get to read the story. And maybe at some point when I'm in your country and I bring the books with me, I can sell you one right then and then you'll have it. So I'm hoping something like that. I'm hoping that instead of seeing this as a loss, we will take advantage of trying to get digital comics going even harder this time. Yeah, it's also a problem right now with Diamond Comics distribution is going through a lot in filing bankruptcy of I forget which number bankruptcy it is.
I think it's chapter 11.
11. Yeah.
Mhm.
So now that's the one where you keep going.
Yeah, that's like just the corporate restructure.
Yeah,
Like, all right.
you're trying to pay things off.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but still, everybody's scrambling. You know, it's like they want their books to come out, and it's
Hmm.
hard on stores. Stores are like suddenly having to look a billion different places to get their inventory. Um, yeah, it's a scary time, but again, comics retailers like comics artists are multidisciplined and can do it. They may not like doing it, but watch, they'll figure it out because they're smart people.
Damn right.
And you know, hopefully it'll everybody's kind of seen that problem coming down the track for a while. You can't have one company running how everything's done and not expect for something to happen with that company and then it affect everybody. Um, yeah, it's a little. It's again, it's scary, but comics somehow seems to weasel out of the rubble of everything that happens every time. So I'm pretty confident it'll keep doing it.
Damn right. Jeff, if you're confident, I'm confident. I like the message here. Comics will survive. Ladies and gents, this is the Shortbox Podcast, and we just finished the talk. Ladies and gents, this is the Shortbox Podcast, and we just finished talking to Jeff Parker about his career in comics, transitioning from an artist to a writer, still being an artist at that, working with big companies like Disney, and all the awesome stuff he's currently doing with Dynamite Entertainment, like the new Zootopia series, which is available now. Issue 2 actually comes out February 12th, so that would be next week or maybe even the same day this episode drops. It depends on how busy I am this week. Zootopia is available every month out through Dynamite Comics. If you want to follow Jeff and stay up to date with everything he's got going on, I'll have some links to his website and socials in the show notes. Go give him a follow, all right? Jeff, do you got any parting words or shameless plug before we wrap up?
Uh, you know what? No, just go to your local shop and show them some love right now. They're you know they're anxious and just simply going in and getting a comic would like when they're least expecting it would be a nice move for both of you.
That's
So
correct.
and you know look out for something you don't usually read. Just I don't know, wander down the other aisles, see if there's something else you want to try because people find all the time that something that was coming out for years that they just now heard about. And you know, and then it becomes their favorite thing. So, you know, I hope that can happen for some of you.
I co-sign all of that, Jeff. That's a great way to end this show. All right. And then let me go ahead and hit stop on here. Stop there. Let me